Welcome to the Tavern Between Dimensions, a monthly tabletop RPG podcast. My name is Carl Dudesh, and I shall be your bartender for your time here today. Joining me for service, as always, is the Dungeon Master to the Explorers of Elsewhere, Dan Tyree.
Hello, hello!
And the final secret boss of Dark Souls, Anton Bain.
That's me. I'm the last boss.
You are. People still haven't quite figured out how to find you yet, though, have they?
That's right. Keep looking.
Now, guys, I found something on the door of the tavern that I'm a little confused by. A letter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Dan,
You sent it.
Well, we'll get to that in a moment, but I think I need to read it out, Dan, because it seems to be very, very pointed towards yourself.
Right, okay.
Allow me. Dear Tavern Keeper, consider just for a moment what is the worst thing one might do on a podcast. Well, the crime I'm going to lay out to you is maybe not as bad as that, but I do believe that justice should be served anyway. Ask yourself, what is in a name? Are they important in this world? Well, I think the answer might depend on what context is used. Our context, in particular, happened in your 7th episode. You were all having a lovely conversation with Julia about how it feels to play in a much-loved campaign such as Wild Beyond the Witchlight. At the 16-minute and 30-second mark, one of you, Dan, mentioned how great it was to be surrounded by such creative and talented people, and then began to credit each person in turn, apart from one. At this point, one of the members was mentioned twice, and I was left out. So let's put this into context. How would Dan like it if we gave you, the Tavern Keeper, all the credit for running his Cormier campaign? Or, I don't know, maybe just forget to mention one of the players entirely? Sure, maybe let's not care about names. I mean, one name is as good as another, right? That nice painting of the Louvre? My dog did that. Building the Eiffel Tower? It was done by a small child. And how about the internet? Why, it was invented by Morrissey, the singer. Well, I'm sure you get the point. So, they have actually left us a scrying address. So we can always bring these people in question. So I think you can offer them, a much heartfelt apology.
Yeah, let's get him on.
Okay. And joining us in the tavern is Chris and Nate from Rough Sketch Podcast. Hello.
No.
Hello.
Hi there.
I think before we begin, Dan, have you got something you wish to say to Chris?
Yeah. I knew it was you.
What was the crime, Dan? What did you do? What did you not do? I think.
Yeah,
is
what
the
are you
question.
apologising for?
You know what you're apologising for.
I was so excited in that episode that I stumbled my words and attributed Nate to Chris's achievements.
Not once, but twice.
Twice. Well.
Yes, so for the people at home who don't know who you are, why don't you tell us a little something about yourself, Nate and Chris?
So I'm Chris,
And I'm Nate.
and together we run a podcast called Rough Sketch Podcast, which is like 62 episodes in so far. We've been doing it about 3 years, and it's a creative podcast where we talk to creative people about creative things and being creative ourselves. We also are in the midst of making and just about to kind of do a comic arts festival in Bristol. So that's very exciting.
So the comic festival is PrideCAF. It is an LGBTQ-centered comic art festival where all of the artists, comic creators, writers, they're all identify somewhere under the LGBTQ umbrella. And it's just giving them a platform to sell their goods in an industry which can sometimes overlook LGBTQ stories.
Oh, that's really amazing, guys.
Free to get in for
Free
the
to
public.
get in. Free and open to all ages.
And open to people who aren't queer. We let
Yep.
the straight people in and then not whatever. You know.
Now with our guests here, I think what we should probably do is move into our first segment. So now now we go into our first segment, which is the guest ale, where we hand our guests the floor for them to talk about whatever they like. So, Nate and Chris, what topic have you brought for us today?
So you guys talk a lot about TTRPGs, and but a lot of it's been, from what I've heard, has been focused on D&D. I'd also like to kind of say that there is you already know that there's a mass of independent RPGs out there. And we've had the great pleasure of speaking to some of the creatives out there that involve themselves in this independent TTRPG scene. So mostly the TTRPGs that I'm talking about are somewhat adjacent to one that's been created called Powered by the Apocalypse. So there's this thing called Apocalypse Engine, for people that don't know, which is mostly a D6 system, six-sided dice system, where you roll 2 six-sided dice, and 7 and 9 will kind of get you a mixed success between a 9 and a 10, or 9 and 11 will get you a pretty good success, where 12 will give you automatic success with bonuses, and anything below a 7 is a fail. But the great thing about these certain RPGs are usually when you fail, and then you get to do that joint storytelling bit where you get to describe how you want to fail, as well as sort of negotiate that with the dungeon keeper or master, or however you want to call them.
Yeah, so a great experience. The first time I've ever done Powered with the Apocalypse sort of system was Chris ran a sort of horror movie-esque campaign, just one shot, where he said, right, you get to pick a decade, you get to pick where this is set, and gave us very much the players. So there was 5 of us, 5 players and yourself, where we got to choose where it was set, and then we got to choose our characters. And it was really lovely to be a part of that more storytelling based RP.
Narrative heavy is how I like to put it.
Yeah, very narrative heavy. And all of us together, even though sort of we'd never played anything like this before, and a lot of us had not even played together, built this really interesting story. And it was great. Loved it. It was like Halloween. What more could you want?
It's a great system. I think I've played one or 2 games in it. You're right. It does lend itself really well to that sort of narrative-driven gameplay. And, unlike a lot of other sort of tabletop RPGs, failure isn't a dead end. It's just a new path.
Well, interestingly, the Shadowrun games that we have on
I was going to mention it.
EOE channel, that runs off a rule set called the Sprawl, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse system.
Okay.
And for that sort of in-depth cyberpunk world, the massive focus on narrative results, I think that's the only way I'd be able to run that story, because there's so many, in fantasy, wizards did it, right? But in modern settings, computers did it, and that's even worse. So being able to explain a lot of that away, but kind of underpinning it all with that simple, 7 or less, 6 or less bad, 7 to 9, and then 9, a 10 plus great. It lets you focus on the important bits, right? Which is a story that everyone wants to tell. Which, 100%.
Even running combat narratively is interesting.
Yeah.
That's really a really different way of doing it.
Most of these games aren't also combat heavy either, but you can do it.
Yes.
There is some real nice ways to do it as well. Even Monster of the Week has some sort of combat in it. Monster of the Week's a really nice kind of way to do it. But the great thing about these little indie RPGs is that there is really something for everyone. So if you are, if you really love queer stories or love stories about lesbians, there's a game called Thirsty Sword Lesbians. If you want to be a thirsty sword lesbian, you can be a thirsty sword lesbian. That sounds like a great idea.
There is a copy of that on the shelves downstairs, and I'm counting down the days until we get to play a game of that.
Yeah. There's a superhero one, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
Yeah, there was Glitter Hearts, which is very much kind of Sailor Moon, Power Rangers sort of kind of thing, where you've got a secret form that you sort of turn into, and there's you have restrictions on what can say you have to have a magical item to turn into this, or if you turn into it, you have to be away from the public because you're very noticeable of who you are, and things like that, which be really, really fun, I think, as a gameplay and as narrative as well.
there's also like a lot of space in this kind of like indie RPG space, and one person in particular, Chris Bissett or Bissett, depending upon how you want to pronounce their name, they've created a solo RPG where you play kind of by yourself, which sounds weird, right? But
Okay.
actually, you give it a go, and it's so atmospheric, and it's because it uses a Jenga tower as its kind of method and a deck of cards.
Okay.
And basically, you are playing it's like you're playing a doom clock. You're gonna die sooner or later, but like how you die is the interesting part, depending upon how the cards come up and how you want to tell that story. It encourages you to write a log as if you are a ship's captain, like facing this demon which has taken over your ship.
That's very cool. I like that.
It's very cool.
Sounds very interesting.
I mean, in terms of like narrative-driven ones, I mean, the one that I'm very keen to play again is, I think Tales of the Loop was one that's very narrative-driven. Even the quote-unquote combat, because you're kids, because you don't really fight, is all narrative-driven, and every fail point that you come across just leads the plot forward again, and I like that one, and one that I definitely want to at some point do as a one-shot for the channel. But that's one that's really, as a narrative-driven RPG, very close to my heart.
I think the only place where Tales from the Loop lost me is because the book's really thick.
Yes, it is.
and like I'm not against like a lot of rules. It's just like I can't contain them in my brain, so I like kind of simplified rules. Rules light systems as well. That's just like, for me, it's the deliciousness of like, oh, I can read this and then get the feeling for it. And something like Brindlewood Bay, where you get to play old ladies being interfering old ladies as an Agatha Christie sort of Jessica Fletcher sort of style novel, just like
Cozy murder. So what was
Jason Cordova and James Boyacek?
Yeah,
these are two people from America.
Yeah, so Jason, who we spoke to, was talking about cozy murders, and we said we had to have Americans explain to us what a cozy murder was, because we didn't know. And he was like, oh, well, whenever we say cozy murders, we think of Britain, we think of the UK, because that's what pretty much like Rosemary and Thyme and things like that.
Yeah.
That's when we were just like, oh. no one knows what a cozy murder is.
I understand what you mean now. Yeah.
So like those like, oh, he was poisoned in the gallery. Oh, you don't actually see the body or anything.
There's no beheading. There's no loss of limb or
something like that. It's just like, oh, he had a slip and hurt his neck and taken. Oh, it's very much like that. That's a cozy murder.
Felt queasy once. Oh no.
Oh no, something slipped in his tea.
Came down with an unfortunate case of the death.
Yeah.
It's very much like that. But even with something like Brindlewood Bay, there is an underlying sort of cultish sub-story, which you get into.
Which is not cozy at all.
It's not cozy. So it's full of dread, and it's full of just like tension. And for me, playing any RPG, that's what I want.
Yeah,
I
that
want
level
that
of tension.
tension. I want to feel like the next thing I do, I might die, or I might do something that's so incredibly weird and just like wonderful. And I just kind of love that tension.
And that's why. So I've set up, and Dan is sort of involved in this as well. I've set up a game of Dread. And for anyone who doesn't know Dread, that's also sort of like a horror-based RPG, but also with a Jenga tower. And the actions that you want to do, will you take a block out of the Jenga tower, and then obviously as the story is hyping up and the horror starting to come more into it, that Jenga tower is going to fall more and more, and if you fall, you die. So, and that's it. And this will be my second time actually like GMing any game, so I'm hoping that I can bring the tension into it.
Like these RPGs, like in terms of playing them, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's obviously a massive plethora of games out there, but like, are there any kind of non-D&D ones, like rules light ones, one-page RPGs, that sort of thing, that you think I 100% want to play that, or you have played it and you would in a heartbeat recommend it to anyone else? I know there's at least one game in particular that Chris is chomping at the bit to play.
Okay.
There's always a
What is that?
couple. I would say, like, if anybody wants to try one of these, there is a great one-page RPG by Grant Howitt, which is Honey Heist. I can't
Oh,
go without recommending Honey Heist or anything by Grant Howitt. He's an incredible writer.
I would also recommend it not just as a player, but as like a first-time GM, because that was the first game I GM'd, and it was really easy for me to get a hang of it and to get a hang of the rules, so then I could concentrate telling the story with people who'd actually like played quite a lot of RPGs before, not even just as a player, just as like a games master as well.
I agree entirely. It's that whole, there's a lot of fear around that joint storytelling, but as long as the story continues to make sense.
Or not, in the case of Honey
Or
Heist.
not, in the case of Honey Heist. Yeah, that can go all right.
Critical Role did an episode of Honey Heist and Crash Pandas, and I think a few others. And that's mostly from where I know all these one-shot RPGs from.
Yeah.
And they're usually wacky, crazy.
His most recent one, which I saw on his Twitter, it is about you are a bunch of failed mascots, and the one mascot that's like really popular, you've all decided that he needs to be murdered. So that is apparently his new game, which sounds brilliant.
Go sign up on his Patreon if you want that. It's a good Patreon to dedicate yourself to, and very cheap as well.
You just need to set that in a theme park and ramp up again that sort of horror aspect of chasing the mascot through closed Disneyland.
But the one that was mentioned, the one that I am chomping at the bit at, is fairly recent. It's fairly recently come out of Kickstarter, called Butter Princess.
Oh, yes.
And if you don't know anything about the Minnesota State Fair, you can just Google Minnesota State Fair, and you'll find a couple of things on YouTube. There's about 500 to 700 different food vendors, and they all serve food which is bad for you because it's America, and it's like just full of
cheese.
Yeah, deep fried cheese, lard, anything dairy related. So it's basically a dairy related adjacent horror story where you play these people that have come to the Minnesota State Fair strictly to do something with the 90-pound butter sculpture, which actually exists and is made every year of the Butter Princess. And you're going to either steal it, destroy it, alter it, take it home, put it in your potatoes. Something is going to happen, but it's a doom-laden game where you play to lose. You're not playing to win. I
love that.
Sounds joyful to me.
Yeah.
And you don't need to know anything about the Minnesota State Fair. I know very little. I've watched like 3 YouTube videos. And I'm ready to play this game.
He's ready to be a butter princess.
I'm ready to torture people, basically. But joyfully. And again, it's that conversation where you get to dip into other people's stories. One person will suggest what might happen, and another person will suggest what might happen. And you might combine these two to just get some collaborative doom. Otherwise you might say, oh, this one's much better, because other people might have really good ideas, but every idea is viable. And you can say to people, this makes me feel uncomfortable. I think if you're going to play any one of these games, the first thing you should do is something called lines and veils. This is lines you don't cross. For me, I'm going to use some pretty strong words, but rape, I don't want that in my TTRPG. Racism, I don't want that in my TTRPG. I don't want those things in my TTRPG. Don't cross those lines. And for me, a veil is just something you kind of pull the wool over, just something you hint at, and you make people feel uncomfortable enough, but not too uncomfortable. So if they're very against blood, then you kind of say, oh, there was a lot of extra fluid in that general direction. You kind of you can make up whatever. It could have been butter. Could have been red butter.
Yeah. But I mean, take like our Witchlight campaign that we're obviously playing with Dan at the moment and Julia. One of our players does have quite a fear, like an arachnophobia. And I think Julia has been very good at sort of keeping that. I mean, they're fine with it if it's sort of described, but if it gets like, I think if a big model came out, I think
that would be hellish.
No.
I even picked up a cuddly toy spider as part of the Witchlight. My character has a cuddly toy spider, and I was like, God, I'm just going to hide that. I know it's not real, but in my head, I'm just like...
What do you think is the quintessential quality of a good RPG or for a good one-shot RPG? Like, what is that core quality that makes it interesting?
For me, it's involving the players in the story as much as the GM is. It's getting that buy-in from the players, getting them as excited to do a thing as the GM is to see whatever it is they're going to do. For me, it's the buy-in.
I mean, that's an incredible feeling on the other side of the DM screen. Like if as a GM you see your players wanting to get like really involved, I guess you could just say, yeah, I did it. Like I've successfully games mastered.
But is the sense of whimsy that's also quite important, right? I feel, or the sense of freedom.
It's the sense of freedom. I can only relate it to the stuff that I've done for improvisation. It's very much yes-anding what people are saying, and you're taking or elements of what people are saying and kind of implementing those. So you're validating their ideas, and it's about that idea validation. I think that's really important. I don't know how you feel about that, Nate.
I think, as I've mostly just been a player rather than a DM or a GM, I think it's just finding something that everyone is interested to, and again, like Chris said, having that involvement as well. So getting your players to choose, like, you know, where is this set, what is your special power, what is this thing that's going to stop you from doing it, even having that nice little sneaky chat with the GM as a character. So having that little, like, let's develop this character, and having that sort of that special kind of like, right, this is your character's backstory, you know, are you going to tell the players, are you going to tell them in character, are you going to tell the other characters? And developing that with the GM as well, I think, is really important. And it makes you involved, and it makes you also feel special at the same time, and everyone likes to feel special. But yeah, I think just as a player myself, considering that it's kind of taken me a long time to get into D&D, I had a situation a long time ago when I was like about 16, where I was asked if I wanted to do some LARPing, and this LARPing was of Vampire the Masquerade, which is already quite a heavy game to get into as a newbie, not just LARPing either. And I completely lost interest straight away because they just shoved the book in my face and just went, all right, have a look at that. And I was, oh, okay.
It's like this thick.
Yeah. Just shoved like, this is how you build a character. And then they actually spent the majority of the evening arguing with the NPCs because the NPCs weren't doing what the GM wanted them to do. And it all just kind of went like, well, this is quite boring. I'm just standing around, like, being really bored. And that sort of kind of went, oh, I'm not really sure I'm really getting into this. And then obviously later on in life, I got more into, and telling Chris, I was just like, oh, I'd really like to do some RPGs, but I've never really got into them. And then having like a little bit more of that involvement, letting someone slowly explain to me how things go. Because it's often in one ear and out the other a lot of the times with me. Having someone actually make you feel like, do you really want to play this game? If you do, if you're really interested, I'll spend that time and I'll sit down with you and we'll chat about it and we'll see what you're excited about and see what kind of characters you want to play. And I think that sort of starting point is really valuable to getting players really invested into a game.
Make your players believe in the characters, and then destroy them. Or, you know, especially if you're playing a doom-laden game anyway, they know it's coming. Yeah. It's just the joys in the loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Dan isn't telling us that Corm is a doom-laden campaign. We're just coming to that conclusion ourselves.
Yeah.
Which is also quite fun. In a weird, sort of morose way.
Yeah, I find myself just hold my bearing myself with every cliffhanger, so...
Even with the big love of one-shot and narrative-driven RPGs, you guys also have a podcast, much like ourselves. Yes. A little bit more successful of a podcast, if I can, if I do say so myself. I mean,
if you count success as in we've been doing it a long time, then yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Rough Sketch? Because it's as you said, it's a creative podcast. So a bit more sort of wide varying than ours. But what does creative podcast mean?
It's a very large lake to cross, if I can use that analogy. It's a very weird analogy, but I'll go with that. When I started this, I sat down with Nate and I had this idea. It's like, oh, what if I got improv people and artists together, what would that look like? How would we do all that? Like, would that work well as a concept?
And I went, oh.
So we sat down, we did a pilot, and I really enjoyed doing the pilot. The pilot was just between myself and Nathan. And we just started like asking people, but mostly we started aiming at artists. I think for the first year, maybe we did mostly artists.
Yeah, so we had some really interesting people. So Soph, who's obviously part of our Witchlight campaign,
First ever guest.
they were the first ever guest. We also had sort of like quite a well-known name in Bristol, Kai Burton. He just kind of went, yeah, sure, that sounds great. So he came and joined us. So that was kind of the first time, especially Chris, but we both learned that you could just ask people and they'll be like, yeah, okay, I'll come on your podcast. And it's like, oh.
Such a weird feeling.
So we had like the creator of Upfest, which is like the biggest like European urban paint fest, like urban sort of paint festival in Europe. He came on
Yeah.
very early on. And yeah, so we've just had like lots of really amazing guests. And and again, like Chris said, we've mostly had sort of artists, illustrators, people creating events like this. But then we moved on to improvisers.
Whenever we can get hold of them.
Yeah,
they're very hard to get hold of.
They're very hard of getting net. We've had directors.
Yeah.
We've had writers.
Yeah.
We've had Mike Cthulhu, who makes very big swords.
Oh, wow.
He came on.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
He was hilarious.
He was great.
Just like that man seems to have put his back out so many times swinging his swords around.
The best story that he told us, because Chris showed me one of his videos before we spoke to him, and it was where he was doing a Warhammer.
He created this big Warhammer sword.
And then he got his daughter with some lead paint to just like whack some black paint into his eyes to look like a model, as how you would make one. And I said, like, was there any ramifications after that? And he was just like, well, like, I cleared it all off and I thought I got it all off. And then we went to the bar later on, and then I felt my eye hurting, and I went in and there was just this big piece of black shit, like right in the back of it. And I was like,
Oh, no.
But he was very cool. We've had Rihanna Pratchett, Terry Pratchett's daughter.
Oh, nice.
She was absolutely lovely. And I think, like, definitely it was a big thing to get us through COVID, because we would do our interviews in person before COVID, and we would have people over and we would cook them dinner, or we would bring snacks, or we would buy them beer, whatever like they wanted, and then just have like a nice chat with them. And we've only done one of those post-COVID, and it was like the first one we've done in like 2.5 years, and that was really lovely. But the fact that when we opened up to doing chats online, obviously we've spoken to people over the pond, in America. We've spoken to people who we generally wouldn't be able to get to come to Bristol, but we've spoken to just like lots of really interesting, fascinating people who don't just tell us about their work, but also how they cope with their work. Like, you know, there'll be some that do it as their full-time job. There's some that they just do it as their passion project. They'll do it as their side hustle, and what that creativity means to them, and why it's so important to them. And then we roll some dice and draw some weird shit.
That's the improv side of things. Yeah, like it's an unplanned conversational chat about whatever people want to talk about with their creativity, and I've got rough ideas as what to talk to people about.
And the one thing that they often say to us is like, well, I didn't expect to be doing this today, after they've drawn whatever we've created,
Which usually means I've done it right.
yeah.
Usually.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask, what with us being a tabletop RPG podcast, have you had anyone sort of well connected in the tabletop RPG community?
Couple. I mean, I've already mentioned Chris Bissett.
Yep.
Chris Bissett's fairly lucrative in their work. Morrigan Corbell, who does not really tabletop RPGs, but does her own version of LARPing, but also draws incredible pictures for tabletop RPGs, and is a massive fan.
Yeah.
I mean, not like massive names. I've approached Matt Mercer and co. They've not said no, but they've also not said yes. They've said not now, which I take to be try again later.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean they were agreed for this show, but unfortunately, Elsie, they couldn't come along, which is again, thankfully
They
your
didn't
letter
write an
turned
angry
up.
letter.
They did
So-
write an angry letter. I happily pushed Matt Mercer
Wow.
aside for the angry letter.
I've also been trying to get Adam Buxton on the
Mm.
podcast for about 3 years, and it's never going to happen. But I still live in
Again,
hope.
they still haven't said no. So.
It's perseverance. Just wear them down.
Yeah. I'm a dog with a bone.
Yeah. The spam folder can only hold so many emails. Remember that. That's
But I think also branching out to a lot of TTRPG like creators out there, because Chris is the majority of the one who finds these people, and he'll just be like, "I really love your game. Will you come talk to us?" And they're like, "Oh, okay then." And just like talking to people who have just really interesting ideas about what would be like a fun game. Oh, I'm going to do something about the Minnesota Fair. This will be fun. Like,
He's on my list.
yeah.
The creator of that is on my
yeah.
list.
And so obviously, like, we spoke to Jason, who is the creator of Brindlewood Bay.
That's coming out in September.
Yeah. And James as well.
Yep, James
Um,
Boyacek from 18th Wall Publications.
And like he actually did a game with Soph, again mentioning Soph Isles, where it's sort of like a time traveling, timey-wimey, because they're both Doctor Who fans, so very timey-wimey sort of traveling back and forth. I think it's really important to, again, sort of give these people a platform, because they're creating amazing things, and obviously they've only got sort of like Twitter, and you get lost in the algorithm. And so it's just like, we want more people to know about these games as well, because they're also really fun to play.
You get the big daddy Wizards of the Coast come along and go, no, look at us, we're bigger.
Look at our big wizard. There.
Sorry.
Chungus Wizard.
Chungus Wizards.
So yeah.
Dan, that's my next character for the next campaign, the Chungus Wizard.
All right. Duly noted.
Since then, I mean, Rough Sketch has evolved very slightly. And sort of since we've been doing like 60 plus episodes, like this year, Nate and I decided to start a not-for-profit business called Rough Sketch Productions, which is like PrideCAF is like solely kind of under the leaf of Rough Sketch Productions now. So the other project, the Pride Comic Arts Festival that we're doing, is like solely owned by basically us.
Yeah.
But as Rough Sketch Productions, and we want to try and like use Rough Sketch Productions as a not-for-profit to try and like immerse that creativity just a bit more. And if we can help out with sort of LGBTQ people, both of us identifying under that sort of umbrella, then that's always going to be better
Yeah.
for the world.
So PrideCAF, obviously very, very excited. This will be the second one we've done. We did one last year, even with sort of COVID still really looming over. We got over 30 plus artists, and it was really, really amazing. And I think what was a real sort of like, just like, oh, my heart sort of situation was when I reopened applications for this year, and pretty much every artist that applied for last year and sold last year reapplied again for this year, because they were like, oh, it was so much fun.
Nice.
Really enjoyed it.
Really good.
Oh, that's nice.
So we've got over 50 plus artists this year.
Oh, we will.
We've got 5 guests coming again. So we've got 4 rejoining us. So we have Joe Glass, who's well known for his comic The Pride. We have Shazleen Khan. They're a very talented web designer, well, webcomic maker, including illustrations and sort of story-based work. We have Sarah Millman, who their independent comic, NPCT. If you're a D&D fan, I would definitely recommend it, because it's based around sort of like that D&D world, but it's set in the modern age and in Cardiff.
All the D&D happens.
Yeah, all the D&D happens.
Doesn't Sarah also have like a D20T system normally to sell?
Yeah, so
A D10
if you
system?
come along and you see Sarah, so as part of NPCT, she's actually written a little notebook of how you can incorporate the tea room that's part of the world of a comic into your campaign, and like what tea will give you certain powers if you attack any of the characters, what sort of like, you know, what their attack skills are and things like that. So she's fully like immersed into D&D as well, and has kind of said, because people have asked for it, they say, oh, can I use your tea room in my game? And she's just like, oh, better yet, have this booklet. Well, I've written all the rules for you. Got that somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
That's
So
very cool.
that's really cool. We've got Wolfgang Crow, who is an amazingly talented comic writer who really focuses on like his own real life stories. He's currently writing a book at the moment called Fractures, where it deals with his own real life experience of like homophobic hate crime, and he actually like gained his master's while writing this book. And we've also got, so they all came last year as well, and it's awesome to have them back again. And this year we've also got Arudale and C. Bedford, who are two also very talented like artists, mostly on the saucy side of comic books. But they're also going to be giving a talk on like how, like, from plot to print is their talk called, and it's basically like how to get your project off the ground to then actually holding a physical copy of it in your hand. And like the others will be giving talks as well, which will be on our website if people want to check them out. But they're all very, very, very much needed talks for people who are interested in creating their own comics.
We have complete intention to record these and subtitle them, make them accessible.
Yeah.
For people.
That's basically sort of like our aim as Rough Sketch Productions, is to make things that usually wouldn't be accessible as possible. So having a convention which is solely for LGBTQ people, so it's a safe space for people to sell their work. It's a safe space for people who are interested in comics and coming.
If people want to come in a gender that they don't generally hang around in
clothing that might generally get them, you know, awfully attacked in the streets just through bigotry. You know, that this is a safe space where they can be themselves and identify as the identity that is them. We also make our tables as cheap as possible for our artists, because we know money is tight for everyone at the moment. And so the fact that they can make more of a profit from selling their work than just saying like, well, I've been able to cover my table. Like a lot of really big comic conventions that happen at the moment, it does just seem to be that they don't care about their independent artists. And it's the smaller events that are happening around at the moment where it's much more like, you know, here's an affordable table, we want you to make a profit, and it's absolutely free because we want people to come in and spend their money on the artists and not just getting into the venue. And it's the same with like a lot of other ideas that we have coming up in the future, hopefully.
Lots being worked on.
Yeah, anyone who can, I think, should definitely go down.
What we'll make sure we'll do as well is put some links down below, not only to Rough Sketch Podcast, but also to PrideCAF, so you can have a look. And with ourselves here, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. But I think we now move on to the Players Round. Thanks for watching. Release segments like this from the Tavern Between Dimensions every Friday here on the Explorers of Elsewhere channel. Otherwise, if you want to listen to the episode in full, you can check us out on Spotify and Amazon Music.